Hi, I'm Peter Chan, National Weather Service Program Lead of the Alaska Weather Show, and I have a very important change notice to share with you. The last TV broadcast of the Alaska Weather Show in the traditional sense over the airwaves will be on Saturday, June 30th. Starting on July 1st and thereafter, the National Weather Service will provide a modified web-based version of the program on a new YouTube channel. So that means you'll be able to find us. We'll be moving from at AKwx TV to at NWS Alaska, and you can go ahead and subscribe to that channel now. There will be a public comment period from May 15th through July 30th, so please send your comments or concerns to nws.service-change-comments@noaa.gov. And if you have any other questions, you may reach carrie.haisley at noaa.gov and donald.moore@noaa.gov. Thank you for your patience and understanding.
Hello again, and welcome to today's show. Up first on the fire danger map, this for grass, you can see quite a high area here over the interior north of the Alaska Range, a little bit down in the Copper River Basin there in areas where you got very high fire danger as far as grass goes, and even a little bit of an extreme there on the north side of the Alaska Range for grass fires, and then also for the central eastern north slope back down into the northwest interior, Noatak Valley areas, almost right out to the coast there, pretty high. Pretty low here over the southwest interior. In fact, all of southern Alaska in the low category there. And the next graphic here showing spruce, which is a little bit better, not quite as in the area of very high. In fact, over the Yukon Flats, very high for spruce, and right over the mid-Tanana Valley there, kind of a high area there, or very high area, as well as the Yukon Flats, and then on down toward Northway. Otherwise, the yellow area here signifying high fire danger for spruce, and some of that into the Copper River Basin there. Otherwise, southern Alaska, Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta up the west coast and in the northwest there, pretty low, as well as the Panhandle. All the spruce there, safe from burning. And for the hazardous weather graphic, this red area here is a warning signifying high fire danger for the Alaska Range until 8 p.m. tonight due to south winds gusting to 30 miles an hour, and then again that very high to local area of extreme fire danger up there. So with those south winds to 30 miles an hour, it's pretty extreme for the fire danger there. And that ends at 8 p.m. when the winds are expected to die off and the humidities come up a little bit. I think the minimum humidity is expected around 23%. And from there, going into satellite imagery, moisture coming northward and veering off to the northwest, pretty much missing the southeast coast here, although clouds over the central and northern areas, and then several areas of cloudiness moving north and northwestward. Out to the west, a big area of low pressure right there, and other troughs swinging down over the eastern Aleutians, but that producing just southeast flow here over the eastern Bering Sea and the interior of Alaska. Upper level ridging out of Canada into the eastern interior. Temperatures well into the 70s there in locations, and those warming temperatures tripped off some thunderstorm activity today right along this band of cloudiness right through here on up into the Koyukuk Valley, a little to the west there into the Kobuk Valley. Otherwise, scattered showers here over southern Alaska, some light rain, clouds, fog, Kodiak Island, sunshine up over the western north slope there. But again, you can just see the solid clouds here over the Bering Sea, either mid, low, or high level clouds. And rolling this through again, you can see kind of another development down here that'll be pulling northwestward later tonight and into tomorrow toward the North Gulf Coast. Otherwise, high pressure keeping it dry for the most part over the southeast coast. And thunderstorms developing right through here today over the eastern interior. One of those right-on battles this afternoon with heavy rain reported and wind gusts over 40 miles an hour as that thunderstorms hit that area. Otherwise, some showers up to the eastern Brooks Range. Sunshine over the north slope, especially the west side there, that easterly offshore flow. Some areas of fog possible on the eastern Arctic coast. And then areas of rain here along this front, heaviest along this front, but nothing too terribly heavy at all, except on the upslope areas of the Aleutian Range there. Some locations had up to an inch in the last 12 hours, but just some light rain for Kodiak Island. Cloudy skies, areas of light rain or showers here for the North Gulf Coast, south central Alaska, Madawaska-Susitna Valley, those areas, Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, and possibly the Kuskokwim Valley there with some scattered shower activity. Out to the west, there's that large low pressure area there. We'll see tonight just drifts eastward a little bit, and that keeps cloudy skies with a chance of rain or showers and fog or drizzle over much of the Aleutians and much of the Bering Sea, with low flying conditions, IFR flying conditions expected out over much of that area, and some fog up through the Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Island, fog eastern Arctic coasts, and enough wind there keeping the fog away from the western Arctic coast, and dry for the north slope. Thunderstorms diminishing into some scattered showers there just south of the central Brooks Range, with some clearing possible in the central interior. Chance of rain, cloudy skies, chance of rain or showers here south of the Alaska Range, including the Copper River Basin. And that's still staying off the coast there. The front's still back to the west enough in that southeast flow carrying the moisture northwestward. That should be a dry evening and overnight period for the Panhandle. And then for tomorrow, a chance of showers slides into the northern areas, otherwise basically dry, partly to mostly cloudy skies, with the partly cloudies down toward Dixon Entrance, mostly cloudies over the central areas, and of course cloudy up over the showers there. And again, tomorrow, temperatures in the 70s, some areas lower 80s, definitely warm enough to trigger some afternoon thunderstorm activity from the eastern Alaska Range up to the southeastern Brooks Range and into the central interior, possibly as far west as Nulato Hills area, and maybe even Buckland. That's kind of pushing it there, though. Look for increasing gusty east and northeast winds here through the Brooks Range passes, north slope, western Arctic coast as well, and areas of fog for the eastern Arctic coast with less wind there, and could be some fog in areas of the Chukchi Sea, and still this low weakening, sliding eastward there toward Nikolsky in the afternoon. That keeps a chance of showers over the Aleutians, cloudy skies, much of the Bering Sea again, areas of rain from the Pribilofs down to the eastern Aleutians into the western Alaska Peninsula. Western interior looks pretty cloudy and occasionally damp with a chance of showers here over the southwest part of the state. And then moving ahead to, let's see, Friday. That front washes out now and doesn't really do much to the panel. If it does anything at all, it'll be tomorrow night when that moves through and dissipates, left with a trough up here along the North Gulf Coast for mostly cloudy skies and showers there, and about the same into the south central Alaska area. It should be dry in the Copper River Basin. Chance of thunderstorms over the eastern border Friday afternoon and up here over the north central interior, otherwise dry. And again, still breezy but less wind. Winds diminishing now for the Brooks Range out to the Arctic coast. Could see some areas of low clouds and fog there, as well as into the Chukchi Sea. Bering Sea, same thing, light winds, resulting in widespread area of low clouds and fog out here. Less in the way of shower activity, though, but still a pretty good chance. South flow here, bringing the moisture up, uplifting there into the Alaska and Aleutian ranges for showers there. Same thing for Bristol Bay, but not too bad elsewhere. And could be some sunshine here through the central interior as well, but temperatures are going to be a little cooler than tomorrow. Moving on to temperatures, lows tonight 45 to 51 for the Panhandle, in the 40s to near 50 everywhere else. Highs tomorrow, 60s for the southeast coast, 60s for the Copper River Basin, near 70 Nikolai McGrath, and upper 50s to lower 60s south central Alaska, lower 50s Kodiak, 55 to 60 in Bristol Bay. Lows 40s to lower 50s over much of southern Alaska, in the lower 50s for the Panhandle, followed by highs in the lower 60s for the southeast coast, Copper River Basin, 60-65, Susitna Valley, Kuskokwim Valley, 50s for the Kenai Peninsula, Kodiak Island, and Bristol Bay. In the interior tonight, lows in the 50s, upper 20s, lower 30s for the Arctic coast, and out toward the Bering Strait. Highs tomorrow, 75 to 85. Call it for the eastern interior there with Eagle 82. Chuck may hit 84 or 5. 80 for Fort Yukon. 70s back toward, let's see, Galena up to Ambler. Much chillier out toward the Bering Strait coast, except Nome up to 64. And then the lows in the 50s. Cooler north of the Brooks Range. Highs cooler here, 70 75, 6 or so for the eastern interior. You see 60s all the way out to maybe Buckland, possibly Daring, high 43. Out to the southwest coast tonight. 40s and upper 30s near 40 for the Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula. Highs tomorrow in the 40s everywhere, maybe 50 for Cold Bay, False Pass. And lows on Friday morning, 40 to 45 here for the southwest coast, just a shade above freezing, right around freezing for St. Lawrence Island. Upper 30s for the Pribilofs, and upper 30s to lower 40s for the Aleutians. Lower 40s or 40 to 45 for the Alaska Peninsula. And for Friday afternoon, highs near 50 for the southwest coast, near 40 St. Lawrence Island, call it 45 St. Paul and St. George, and mid-40s for the Aleutians.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Okay, flying weather for tomorrow morning. A lot of IFR over the Bering Sea. Improves as you get down toward the Aleutians with some areas of marginal VFR from Matka eastward down Alaska Island, and IFR for the Alaska Peninsula southward, and that extends up across Kodiak Island. Gulf of Alaska up into Prince William Sound, North Gulf Coast. Marginal VFR here, southern Alaska inland areas. VFR in the interior, all the way up to the north slope. Central eastern Arctic coast has some IFR along areas of the coastline up there. And for the southeast coast, looks pretty good, VFR. For the afternoon, marginal VFR for the Panhandle, IFR from the Gulf of Alaska, actually Northeast Pacific here, right up to the North Gulf Coast. Prince William Sound again, right down along the Kenai Peninsula. And looks like a little bit of IFR there, east side of Kodiak Island. Otherwise, marginal VFR, Shelikof Strait, right on up into western Cook Inlet to the Alaska Range. Interior, good VFR all the way up to the Arctic coast. And that IFR in the morning burns off there for the Panhandle in the afternoon. And IFR holds here, northern Bering Sea, and right up to the east of St. Lawrence Island, and covering areas north of the Aleutians. That includes the Pribilofs, Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, marginal. And moving on to Friday morning, some IFR returns to the eastern Arctic coast here. Otherwise, VFR to the west, interior, good VFR, right down to the Alaska Range, marginal VFR there. Pretty good IFR out over the Bering Sea now, extending down to the central and western Aleutians, marginal VFR for the Fox Islands, and some IFR for the Alaska Peninsula. A little more IFR into northern Kodiak Island, right up into southern Cook Inlet, across the Barren Islands there, and up into the North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound. Staying VFR for the Panhandle, but marginal VFR right along the coastline now for the morning hours, and by afternoon, that pushes inland a little bit there into the central inside waters. Otherwise, VFR to the east and southeast. Band of IFR here hung up along the North Gulf Coast, again into Prince William Sound, down to maybe Resurrection Bay, southern Resurrection Bay. But interior areas, pretty good VFR. Still some marginal VFR, Cook Inlet and western Cook Inlet especially, down to Kodiak Island. And IFR north of the Bering Strait, right up into the Chukchi Sea, and covering a good chunk of the Bering Sea again. For the passes, Anaktuvik, VFR, same forecast for Radigan, VFR. Lake Clark and Merrill, mostly marginal, lowest conditions on the eastern approaches, and marginal VFR maybe trending toward VFR or just kind of bouncing back and forth at times tomorrow, one or the other. So not too bad. Windy, definitely VFR. Isabel, eastern Alaska Range looking really good. Mentasta, VFR. And Tanita, marginal VFR, especially on the eastern entrance. Portage, IFR, lowest conditions, east side there, Passage Canal, Whittier side of the pass, and White and Chilkoot, VFR. Looking at the freezing levels, up about 8,000 feet here over the eastern interior, all the way up to the western Alaska or western Brooks Range area, and about 4,000 to 6,000 feet out here over the Bering Sea. Warmest air aloft up to the north right through here, actually 6,000 to 7,000 feet, and then about 8,000 there for the Panhandle. And from there, looking at icing, got a band here of possible light to very isolated, moderate rime or mixed icing here, lower Yukon River Valley deltas right on down into northern Bristol Bay. And for the another band here along the North Gulf Coast with moisture coming up and coming up from the south and southeast. So pretty good chance of seeing some areas of light icing here in this area. And for the jet stream, south winds up to 80 knots, eastern North Gulf Coast, southeast 70 knots, central interior, lighter out to the west. 9,000 feet, 40 to 45 knot winds here, and main low way out here over the Aleutians, 3,000 feet, not too bad over the interior and the Panhandle. And east 40 knots there along the eastern Arctic coast, southeast or east-southeast 40 knots for the northeast Bristol Bay area, and a little breezy along the North Gulf Coast here, otherwise easterlies at about 40 out over the northwest Bering. And for turbulence, look for moderate turbulence here for the western Brooks Range along mountains out to about Point Hope, Cape Lisburne, with quite an area of isolated moderate turbulence north slope to the Arctic coast, and also down here along the North Gulf Coast.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, joined once again by the science liaison of GINA, Eric Stevens. GINA, of course, is the Geographic Information Network of Alaska, based up at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And GINA is all about satellites, and Eric is always here to tell some really cool stuff about satellites. Now, the last time you were here, we talked about how the weather satellites can see clouds and what's under the clouds, but you're telling me that satellites can do a lot more, even protect the general public with aviation safety information.
That's right. There's one particular aspect of satellites we're going to talk about today that might not be immediately obvious, and that is detecting things in the atmosphere that are not clouds, that are not snow, not rain, but rather a hazard that can happen here in Alaska, and that is volcanic ash.
Of course.
When a volcano goes off, puts ash in the air, this is, of course, a hazard to the public if the ash were to fall on the ground in accumulating amounts.
Sure.
Additionally, while the ash is in the air, and this is the more frequent hazard, is it's a hazard to aviation, because you cannot fly an airplane into volcanic ash without great risk. Worst case scenario, the ash gets into a jet engine, wrecks the engine, kills the engine, and now you have an airplane flying with no engines.
Right.
It won't fly for long. So aviators need to avoid that ash. How do you avoid the ash? You have to know where it is by identifying it with a satellite image and perhaps predicting then where the ash will flow with the overall weather patterns. Satellites are so important for identifying when a volcano goes off and then tracking the ash after the volcano injects the ash into the atmosphere.
Now, are you talking about seeing the heat signature or a huge volcanic plume with a cloud that we're used to seeing in the really pretty pictures of any Alaska volcano that's erupted recently, Redoubt, for example? Or are we talking about the really fine details? Because this is polar orbiting satellites, the ones that are very low to the ground, right?
The geostationary satellites can do some detection. The polar orbiters, like you say, they're closer to the Earth. They give the even better view. In answer to your question, I would say all of the above.
Oh, okay.
A heat signature from a volcano going off with all the heat that comes with the eruption, that can be identified in infrared imagery. Okay. We've got images from the Kamchatka Peninsula. That's the far eastern part of Russia on the western side of the Bering Sea, loaded with volcanoes.
Right.
You know, Alaska has plenty of volcanoes of its own. We can also be affected when a volcano goes off in Kamchatka, say, and then the weather carries that ash toward Alaska from the west.
Right.
You can see the infrared heat signature, like you say. Also, the ash in the air can be detected by doing some sophisticated channel differencing within the satellite data. You can find the identification of sulfur dioxide, say, that's a component of the volcanic emission, and you can trace this with the satellite imagery. sometimes volcanoes go off that haven't gone off before, and we're not expecting them to go off. Say if there's no seismometers around a given volcano that hasn't gone off in 100 years, you might not be expecting it to go off. In the satellite imagery, since satellites can be globally comprehensive, that might be the first sign that you have that a volcano in an unexpected area is going off.
That's a good backup system. Okay.
Right.
Wow.
Right. And people are working all the time on automating the interrogation of satellite data by computers to provide a first alert to a human, so the software will say, we think this might be important. Human, go take a closer look. Because the people are still the best way to interrogate the imagery, but the planet's a big place, and we can't be looking everywhere all the time, so the software helps give a first cut. And then in Alaska, there's a special kind of surprise angle where the satellites are helpful, and that is the Katmai eruption of 1912. Huge eruption. There is still somewhat of a moonscape out there in southwest Alaska where all this ash is laying on the ground. And sometimes a strong weather pattern comes along where we have roaring northwest winds that go across the Alaska Peninsula there and can actually pick some of this ash up off the ground. No volcano is going off. This was more than 100 years ago that volcano actually blew. So you're not going to see a heat signature like we were discussing. There will be no seismic signature of a volcano going off. So those data sets, they'll say, oh, no problem. But you can see in some of the satellite imagery this ash, as it's called, resuspended. When the wind comes along, picks it up, the ash can be lofted a few thousand feet in the air just with the wind. And an airplane flying into that plume is exposed to some danger. So we need to track that ash to provide guidance to aviators that you don't want to be flying here at these elevations in this area. We've got some imagery of the resuspension, and you can see the wind blowing strongly from the northwest, picking up the ash and blowing it down to the southeast. And so that's another, perhaps not immediately obvious hazard of volcanic ash. Katmai is the gift that keeps on giving, for sure.
Very good. So we've got satellites that can help us understand the weather from the past and the immediate past, and we talked last time about how that's feeding into the forecast modeling to help improve predictions, but now they're also protecting the general public with aviation sensitive information and watching volcanoes, whether they're erupting or maybe have erupted in the past, and finding the left behinds from those volcanic events there. So really impressive stuff. Eric, thanks so much for joining us again today, and you're a gift that keeps on giving from the satellite community, so thanks a lot, and we hope to have you back again soon. Again, Eric Stevens with Gina at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And if you'd like to check out any of the information that Eric has shared with us again today, you can do that very easily by going to www.gina.alaska.edu. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, and thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Coastal water forecast for the south coast here, the Panhandle. South winds 15 to 20 knots, and southeast 15 knots here for the central and north coast. Extreme north coast here, 25 knots southeast wind, seas at about 8 feet. Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay, south winds at 10 knots. Same thing for Stevens Passage, southerlies at about 10 knots with 2-foot seas. And southeast winds at 10 knots for Clarence Strait with seas at 2 feet. And for Friday, winds become northwest here on the south coast, only about 15 knots. Central coast, westerlies, 10 knots, and up to the north there, west winds 15 to 20 knots. Northern inner channels, light variable wind conditions with slight seas. South at 10 for Stevens Passage, and northwest at 10 for Clarence Strait. Prince William Sound, east winds 25 knots, seas 6 feet. East winds 30 knots here for the eastern North Gulf Coast with 10-foot seas, and east at about 20 knots there along the south coast of the Kenai Peninsula. Same thing for the Barren Islands, east at 20, seas about 7 feet. Small craft advisories, southern Cook Inlet, Kamishak Bay, northeast winds 25 knots, 5-foot seas, and northeast at 20 for northern Cook Inlet with 5-foot seas. Then on Friday, north to northeast breeze here at about 15 knots for Cook Inlet. And southeast wind, 20 knots. Barren Islands, Kamishak Bay, seas at about 5 to 6 feet there. The North Gulf Coast, pretty uniform wind and sea-wise. Southeast winds, 15 knots, 5-foot seas. And east winds of 15 knots with 3-foot seas for Prince William Sound. Kodiak Island, Shelikof Strait, northeast of 15, otherwise east side of Kodiak there, south at 15. And the Alaska Peninsula, variable winds 10 to 15 knots with 3 to 4-foot seas. Light easterly winds, slight seas for Bristol Bay. And for Friday, east winds 20 knots now for Bristol Bay, seas up to 4 feet. Otherwise, Pacific side of the peninsula, variable winds at 10 knots. Bering Sea side, east-southeast of 15. Kodiak Island, southeast winds 15 knots. And for the central and eastern Aleutians tomorrow, really laid down wind-wise is variable winds, light and variable winds at 10 knots. Seas anywhere from 2 to 7 feet. And the western Aleutians, north to northwest winds, 15 to 20 knots with seas running 6 to 8 feet. And then on Friday, western Aleutians out through here, west of Adak to about Shimia, west-northwest at 20 knots, seas 6 feet. And for the central Aleutians, variable winds, 10 to 15 knots. Fox Islands, light variable winds with slight seas. And for the southwest coast, east-northeast winds 10 to 15 knots, strongest south of Nunivak Island. Otherwise, Norton Sound, St. Lawrence Island, northeast wind of 10 knots with 2-foot seas, northeast at 20. For St. Matthew Island, 7-foot seas. Otherwise, light variable wind conditions with 4-foot seas for the Pribilofs. For Friday, St. Paul and St. George, still in that light variable wind pattern there at about 10 knots, northeast 15 for St. Matthew Island. Kuskokwim Delta coastline, southeast wind, 20 knots, 3-foot seas. Yukon Delta coast east at 10. Norton Sound, St. Lawrence Island, east winds, 10 knots, 2 to 3-foot seas. And for the Chukchi Sea here, north to west winds, 15 to 20 knots. And we've got basically small craft or brisk wind advisories for the western Arctic coast, northeast at 25, central coast east at 20, and northeast 15 there for the east side. And for Friday, brisk wind advisories, eastern Beaufort Sea coast, tightening up the gradient a little there for sustained winds out of the east and northeast at 25 knots, northeast 20 on the western Arctic coast, and 25 out of the east for the west side here, up to 30 knots, a point lay down to about Cape Lisburn or so. Otherwise, the Chukchi Sea much lighter from the east and southeast at 10 to 15 knots. For tonight, large low centered over the central Aleutians. Much of the Bering Sea and Aleutians has clouds with areas of light rain and showers. Another low here keeps it wet over Kodiak Island with light rain at times, and that spreads up to the North Gulf Coast. Cloudy skies, areas of showers over southern Alaska, mostly dry in the interior, those thunderstorms tapering off this evening. And Panhandle stays dry, chance of rain on the north coast late, chance of showers tomorrow in the north with dry conditions down to the south. Again, afternoon thunderstorms developing up over the interior, and that same pattern again on Friday.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.